Hey everyone, in this video we're going to take a look at the second story from chapter 34 of the Road to Latin textbook. Now this is called De Urbe Nova, and it's continuing the story of Romulus and Remus, and it's really focusing on Romulus now that Remus has been killed, and how he builds the city of Rome. So like I always tell you, if you want to get more resources on this, feel free to check out the Nova Latin site. You can find vocab, grammar, all these notes, things that'll just kind of help you through the story. So since this is the second story rather, in chapter 34, I'm going to assume that you've already worked your way through the grammar. But if you haven't, make sure you go do that. At least look it over and make sure you have the vocab under control too. Using these stories to learn the grammar in context is the best way to go, right? So instead of just looking through your notes and feeling like you've got it, use those notes to practice through the story, if that makes sense, okay? So as you're reading through the story, you'll see Road to Latin does a really good job of repeating a lot of the grammar, in this case, third declension adjectives. So you'll be able to see it and kind of pick up on it. And hopefully practice it and understand it through the context of the story. So I'd always recommend you do that. The other thing I'd encourage you to do is do the read and reread method, right? So as you're working your way through, read through it once, write down any problem areas you have, write down, it could be vocab or sentences, grammar, anything you don't understand. When you get done with the story, right, in a full read, look at where you went wrong. If it's vocab, that's really easy. Just go look it up, right? Use a vocab list for this book. You can find it pretty easily. If it's grammar, it's probably something from this chapter. Go through your notes and try to figure out where you're going wrong. Then go back, read the story again. It might take you 2, 3, 4 times, as many as you need to, but you're aiming to be able to read this story, translate the entire thing without many mistakes. Maybe you miss a word here or there, but being able to understand rather almost the entire thing without any help. So no vocab, no grammar. That's how you know you're in a really good place and you're ready to move on. The other thing I always tell you, read the story out loud, right? If you can find a classmate, read it to them, work on your speaking, your pronunciation. If they can read it back to you, now you can work on your listening skills. You never want to shut those off. It's the best way to learn a new language. You don't want to just translate this in your head, okay? So if you haven't done that yet, pause the video, go do it and come back. This video won't be as useful if you haven't done that. So I'm going to keep moving forward. And at this point, like I said, you should have already done that and you feel really confident and you can use the rest of the video as just sort of a double check to make sure that you are on the right track. Okay, so like I said, this story is picking up with Romulus and Remus and starts like this. You have Urbe Nova, quam Romulus condidera erat parva et paucos incolos habeba. Okay, so Urbe Nova means the new city. So you have a relative pronoun here, quam, right? So the new city, which it's accusative, right? It's the direct object because the main idea is Romulus condiderat, had founded. So the first line is saying the new city which Romulus had founded was parva, it was small, right? And it had habeba, right? It's technically imperfect, but you can translate it. It had paucos incolas, it had few inhabitants. Okay, so when Rome starts out, there's really nobody living in it, right? It's not that big of a place. Then you have sed rex Romulus magnam urbem cupive, itaque asilum aperuit. So, but King Romulus, right? He desired a big city, right? A magnum urbem. Okay, so he wanted to have a big city, and so he opened it as an asylum, right? He opened an asylum. And by asylum, there, they really mean like a refuge in Latin, right? A place for people to go. So it's kind of where you get in English the idea of seeking asylum, right? It's a place to kind of be a refuge, kind of makes sense here too. So he opened it as a refuge, or he opened a refuge, meaning he invites a lot of people to come in and kind of start up this new city with him, right? Sort of like a safe space. Then you continue on. You have ad asylum homines omnium generum convenerunt, okay? So to the refuge, meaning to the city of Rome, people, homines, right? People or men, you could even translate it, probably works better here because there are no women, we're going to see. So men are people of all generum, of all races, right? Of all kinds is kind of a good way to do it. Of all kinds, convenerat, came, right? So it came to the refuge, to the city. So all these different people show up, and it's about to tell you who these people are. You have errant pastores, mercatores, agricolae, nautae, servi, latrones. Okay, so there were, right, or they were, if you want to think of the people, the homines, there were pastores, right, so shepherds, mercatores are merchants, agricolae are farmers, nautae are sailors, servi are slaves, and in this case it probably means freed slaves, right, and latrones is the interesting word, which means like robbers, right, thieves. Okay, so all sorts of people are coming to Rome in the beginning, and this is sort of the famous backstory of the city of Rome. It really is kind of like odds and ends pieces, right? When you're thinking of the people there's some thieves. It's kind of like these undesirable people who had nowhere else to go, which is why the chapter is calling it a refuge, right? An asylum. Okay. Then you have homines qui ex suis civitatibus pulsi erant ad asylum properaverant. Okay, so the people, the homines, right? The men is probably a better way to do it. The men who had been driven out, right? So pulsi erant is pluperfect passive, right? You can tell because you have a fourth principal part. Pulsi is describing homines, and it's going with erant, which is the imperfect form of the verb to be. So you're saying men who had been driven out from their own states. Civitatibus means like states or cities is kind of the idea. From their own states, they properaverant, they hastened ad asylum, to the asylum, right, to the refuge. So they're castaways, basically, right? People who had been sent out or driven out, and they weren't wanted anymore. They show up in Rome, and that's how the sort of first population of Rome gets going. Okay. Then it continues, and you have said feminae ad asylum non venerant, itaque Noah in urbe fuerant paucae feminae. So this is why I keep telling you homines make sense to be men here instead of people, right? Because it says, but women, right? Feminae, women, non venerant, they did not come to the asylum or to the refuge. So there's no women here. They didn't show up, right? Probably because all these men are really like castaways, right? Why would they show up? And you have itaque, and so in Urbe Nova, in the new city, meaning in Rome, fuerant is just perfect tense of the verb to be. So you're saying there was, right? Or there were, rather. There were paucae femina, there were few women, right? So in the new city, there's not a lot of women, right? There were few women in the new city. Okay. Then you have tum Romulus ad gentes quae prope habitaban nuntios celeres mise. Okay. So since there's no women, then Romulus he miset, he sent nuntios celeres, right? So he sends messengers, and they're described as swift, right? Celeres, swift messengers. So then Romulus sent swift messengers to the people, right? To the gentes, the peoples, almost means like tribes in this sense. But the peoples are tribes who lived nearby, right? Quae is referring to the gentes who, prope habitaban, were living nearby, right? Prope, they're living near. Okay, so he sends to all these people messengers, right? And he's going to say like, "Hey, let's join up." Then you have cum eis gentibus regnum commune cupivit et ab hominibus filias uxoris petivet. Okay, so that first part, the cum eis gentibus, right? That just means with these peoples or with these tribes, right? So that phrase isn't really where we want to start. We want to start with cupivit. He desired, right? So he desired a regnum commune, right? A common kingdom with these people, meaning he wants to bring them in and all join together, right? And again, there's the adjective we're working on this chapter, right? Commune. So he desired this common kingdom with these peoples, and petiwit, he sought from these people, or from the peoples, ab hominibus, right? So from these people, he sought filias uxores, so daughters and wives. Okay, so from these men, he wanted. It almost, you can translate as he sought their daughters as wives is kind of one way to do it. But he's looking for daughters and wives, right? So they have no men. So the idea is let's make a treaty, which is a common thing like marriage pacts or marriage treaty. So he's saying, why don't you come here, right? Bring the filias, right? Your daughters. We'll all join up. We'll intermarry, and we'll start a common kingdom, right? A regnum commune. Okay. And then you finish with this line. You have said negotium nuntiorum erat difficile, ab omnibus gentibus pulsi sunt. Okay, but the task, the negotium, right, is where you get the word like negotiation from, right? The work or the task or the business might even be a good way to translate it. But the business or the task of the messengers was difficult, right? Erat difficile. Again, there's a third declension adjective. Okay, so it was difficult, right? It wasn't going very well. Okay, and you have pulsi sunt. They were driven off, right? Ab omnibus gentibus, from all the tribes, all the people. They were driven away. So everyone Romulus sent a messenger to, they all say, no, right? We're not doing this, right? Because he has this sort of city of undesirable people. So nobody really wants to join up with him. Okay. Then you go to the next paragraph. Okay, so we continue on. And you have Dende Romae Romulus cum studio ludos parave et Sabinos finitimos potentes ad ludos vocave. Okay, so then or next, in Rome, Romulus, he prepared, right? So in Rome, he prepared ludos, he prepared games cum studio with like zeal, right? It's kind of one way to translate it. Zeal is kind of a interesting word, a weird word. In English, you might even say like eagerness, right? So he's all excited to do this. Okay, so he prepared games, and it's really talking about like sort of like chariot races, gladiator competition, that type of thing. Okay, so the ludos he's preparing is like a big festival. Okay. And he wokawit, he called the Sabinos, right? The Sabines. Now, this is a group of people from a famous episode in Roman history, which is what we're building towards, right? The Sabine women. They're described in the chapter as finitimos potentes, so powerful neighbors. Finitimos is the neighbors there. So the powerful neighbors of the Romans is really what it means. He called them ad ludos, to the games. And by wokawit, called, it really means he invited them, right? So he invited them to the games, and he's hoping that they'll show up. Okay. Then you have Sabini fabulas de viribus Romanorum audiverant. Okay. So the Sabines, the Sabini, right? The Sabines had heard, audiverant is pluperfect tense. So they had heard stories, fabulas, de viribus Romanorum, right? About the strength of the Romans. Okay. So in other words, they've heard about this, and they're like, yeah, like we've heard about these people. Okay. Then you have Itaque, rather, nuntium libenter accepera. Okay, so they welcome the messenger libenter, gladly, or sort of willingly. Gladly is a good way to do it. So they gladly welcome the messenger. Okay, so they've heard of the Romans, and they actually welcome in. The Sabines are the only ones. Okay. Then you have cum omnibus feminis et liberis Romam convenerunt. Okay, so with omnibus feminis, all their women, right, is how you want to translate that, all their women and children, right? So that phrase is ablative, with all their women and children. Convenerunt, they convened, or they came together at Rome, right? Romam, to Rome. So they all show up to Rome, and they show up with all their women and their children, right? Exactly what Romulus was kind of hoping for. Okay. Then you have the last line here. Brevi tempore Romulus ipse signum dedit et Romani ludus commiserunt. Okay. So in a short time, or soon, brevi tempore, Romulus himself, Romulus ipse, right? He himself dedit signum. He gave the signal, and the Romans, Romani, commiserunt, they commenced or began the ludos, the games. Okay. So Romulus gives the signal, and the games are off and running, and this festival starts. Okay. So this chapter is part of a bigger story, right? In the Sabine women, we're going to see what happens, kind of finishing it off in the next chapter. But you're getting a sense of the starting point of Rome, right? It's not exactly glorious, even though they have Romulus, this famous leader. Nobody wants to live there, right? So he's built this city that is really full of just shepherds and thieves, right? Nothing really good. So it's giving you the beginnings of how he's going to get the population going and get people to actually show up. Okay, so hopefully that story made sense. Again, it's the second story, so at this point you should feel pretty good about all the grammar, right? Noun, adjective, agreement, third declension, adjectives, all that stuff we've spoken about. You should feel pretty good about it. But if you have any questions at all, put them in the comments. I'm happy to help. Otherwise, keep reading this story, like I said, until you're able to do it without any vocab help, without any grammar. That's how you know you're in a good place and you're ready to move on. Good luck.